The morning light sliced through Harold Whitmore's window, casting long shadows across the floorboards of his study. He didn't move. The house was still, the kind of stillness that grows louder with time. A pot of coffee sat cooling beside a half-read legal journal. The newspaper remained folded on the arm of the chair, untouched. Retirement had offered Harold silence, and at first, he welcomed it. After decades on the federal bench, silence felt earned, a trophy, even. But recently, it had begun to feel more like a weight. Every day looked like the one before it, and the world beyond his doorstep seemed to spin a little faster, growing harder to recognize. He stood and stretched, peering through the window out toward the street. His neighbor, Isabela Reyes, was sitting on her porch, hunched over something in her lap. Harold narrowed his eyes. Normally, she'd be tending her flowers by now, or waving to him with that quiet smile she always wore. But today, she was still, rigid, not herself. That tug in his chest, instinct honed from decades of reading people, made him grab his coat and head outside. "Good morning, Isabela," he called, voice light. "You all right?" She looked up sharply. Her expression softened when she saw him, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, good morning, Harold." He stepped closer, his shoes tapping lightly on her porch steps. "Mind if I sit?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Please." He sat beside her, eyes drifting to the letter in her hands. White paper, official seal, far too familiar. "What is it?" he asked gently. She held it out wordlessly. Harold took the paper, adjusting his glasses. A notice from the Department of Homeland Security. Immediate review of permanent residency status. Scheduled removal. Violation of national security protocols. The usual bureaucratic language, cold, clinical, final. "This can't be right," he said, rereading the line that said she had 30 days to leave the country. "I've been here since I was 13, she said quietly. "I've paid taxes, raised children, married a husband. I haven't left the country in 60 years. Harold looked at her. "You're not even a citizen?" I applied. It got complicated. But they let me stay. She looked away. "Until now." He read the letter again, trying to find the loophole. "Somewhere, someone's made a mistake." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't think this is a mistake." Harold blinked. "What do you mean?" But she didn't answer. Not directly. "It's a long story." He handed the letter back, unsettled. "Then maybe it's time you told it." They sat in silence for a long moment. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the trees. A wind brushed through the hedges. Finally, Isabela stood. "I should get back inside," she said. "Thank you for stopping by." Harold watched her go, her step slow, deliberate. He stared down the sidewalk for a beat longer, then turned and walked back to his house. That afternoon, he dusted off a box in his closet marked Judicial Archives, Private. Inside were old case files, newspaper clippings, legal briefs he had annotated in his own hand. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but the feeling in his gut had returned. Something didn't add up. He made a few calls. A retired clerk. An old contact at the immigration office. A friend of a friend still active on the bench. Each call chipped away at the same uncomfortable truth. Isabela's case wasn't random. Her name had flagged something. An old Cold War-era watch list, buried deep in archived files, linked to a student resistance group in South America from the 1950s. A group considered dangerous at the time, now largely forgotten. But evidently not forgotten by everyone. Harold leaned back in his chair, stunned. He flipped through his own past case notes. A 1985 asylum hearing. Reyes v. U.S. Immigration Authority. He remembered the ruling. The group was denied protection, labeled a security risk. It had made headlines. His decision was quoted for years. But he'd never connected the dots. Isabela had never mentioned her past. And now, all these years later, the judgment he once stood by with such pride felt different. The next morning, Isabela was in her garden again, pulling weeds with practiced hands. Harold approached the fence. "I made some calls," he said. She glanced up. "I thought you might. There's more to this, isn't there?" She set her gloves aside. "There is. But I didn't think it would matter anymore. That part of my life. I buried it a long time ago." He didn't push, not yet. "You were part of that resistance group, weren't you?" Her silence said everything. "I ruled against them," he said softly. "In '85. Isabela nodded once. "I steady." "I know. I read your opinion. You called us ideologically driven and a potential national threat." Harold winced. "That was a different world." "I know it was. That's why I never said anything." He exhaled slowly. "You saved lives, didn't you? She hesitated. Then, yes. But it didn't look like that on paper. They stood quietly for a moment, the space between them heavy with things unspoken. I want to help, Harold said finally. If you'll let me. Her eyes softened, but her voice was measured. Helping me might cost you something. Not helping you would cost me more. That night, Harold sat at his desk, legal pads spread out before him. The gears in his mind turned with purpose, the old instinct returning like muscle memory. It had been years since he'd built a case. But he wasn't just building one now. He was unearthing a truth the law had missed, a truth that still mattered. The following morning, Harold rose before sunrise. His desk light flicked on just as the birds outside began their cautious chorus. A half-written letter to a federal appeals board sat on the desk, alongside a stack of dog-eared immigration casebooks and a steaming mug of black coffee. The rules had changed since he last practiced law, tightened, tangled, politicized. But the fundamentals, the bones of the system, still existed. Somewhere in that dense forest of policy, there had to be a path forward for Isabela. He scribbled a few final notes and set the pen down. This wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning. Later that day, Harold knocked gently on Isabela's front door. She answered quickly, as if she'd been expecting him. I made some tea, she said. Figured you'd come back. They settled in her sitting room, surrounded by ceramic figurines, old photographs, and the faint scent of rosemary. Harold took the cup she offered but didn't drink right away. I need to know everything, he said. If I'm going to argue your case, I need to know what's not in the file. Isabela set her own cup down carefully. You read about the resistance group? He nodded. She leaned back, hands folded in her lap. I was 16 when I joined. My brothers were gone. One disappeared, the other killed. I handed out leaflets, passed messages. I wasn't a soldier, not really. But it didn't matter. We were all marked. Harold listened intently. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. When the crackdown came, we had no warning. I fled with my aunt. We had forged papers, and eventually, we landed here. I was granted temporary residency because of my age. Later, I tried to apply for citizenship, but my past flagged me. I was told it would raise questions, so I let it go. I married, had kids, lived quietly. I thought it was enough. It should have been, Harold said, his voice low. I never hid, she added. I paid taxes, volunteered at the community center, voted in school board elections, illegally, I suppose, but no one ever asked. Because you belong here, Harold said. She smiled faintly. Do I? He met her eyes. Yes, and I'm going to prove it. Back at home, Harold launched into motion. He contacted a former immigration judge he once mentored, now working in legal aid. He reached out to a sympathetic journalist who had covered asylum reform for years. He even emailed a congressional staffer whose mother once appeared in his courtroom. By the end of the day, he had assembled a fragile web of allies. Not many, but enough. He drafted a formal request for a stay of removal, temporary protection, pending a motion to reopen her case. He cited legal precedents, shifting international perspectives, and humanitarian considerations. He built his argument like a cathedral, one brick, one citation at a time. But beneath it all, a thought nagged at him. He had condemned people like her. His ruling in 1985 had helped close the door to hundreds of similar cases. And now, years later, he was trying to pry it open again, for one woman. What did that make him? That evening, he returned to Isabela's. She greeted him at the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel. I've drafted a stay, he said. We'll file it tomorrow. She nodded. Thank you. There's something else, he added, more hesitantly. A reporter. She's interested in your story. Says she might be able to raise public pressure. Isabela's face clouded. I've spent 60 years trying not to be a story. I know, but we may need visibility. Cases like this, they disappear without attention. She was silent for a long time. Then, softly, what will people think? That I was a criminal? They'll see you for who you are. A grandmother. A neighbor. Someone who stood up for what was right. She glanced at the floor, then back at him. All right, but if I do this, we do it together. Harold smiled. Agreed. The next morning, Harold met the reporter, Sophie Karen, at a corner cafe. She was sharp-eyed, late 30s, with a notepad already open before she sat down. Isabela gave me permission to speak with you, he said after ordering. I appreciate that, Sophie replied. Her case is unusual. Old cases like this, most never resurface. They do when someone makes them resurface. You think this is political? I think it's personal, Harold said. And I think someone wants to make a point. But they've picked the wrong person. Sophie raised an eyebrow. You mean you? Or her? He smiled. Both. She leaned forward. Tell me the truth. Are you doing this because of your 1985 ruling? Harold didn't flinch. Yes. And does that scare you? He stirred his coffee. It should. That night, as Harold walked home through the dusky street, he passed by Isabela's porch and saw her sitting with a photo album in her lap. She looked up and smiled. I've been thinking, she said as he reached the steps. I may still have some old documents. From when I arrived. Maybe something we can use. That's good, he said. Every detail helps. She hesitated. I've always believed in this country. Even after everything. But lately. I wonder if it still believes in people like me. Harold sat beside her. Then we'll remind it. They watched the stars blink into view. No sirens. No shouts. Just two quiet people on a quiet street, preparing for the loudest fight of their lives. And neither of them planned to lose. Harold stood in front of the courthouse for the first time in years, briefcase in hand, heart steady but unfamiliar with this version of himself. He wasn't here to preside or be honored. He was here to plead. For someone else. For something greater than legacy. Inside, the filing clerk raised an eyebrow when she saw his name on the paperwork. Judge Whitmore, she asked. Didn't you retire years ago? Apparently not quite enough, he said with a faint smile, handing over the petition. Motion to reopen based on extraordinary humanitarian grounds, she read. Reyes versus United States. He nodded. Time sensitive. We're requesting an emergency stay. I'll expedite it, she said. Your name still carries some weight. That, Harold thought, was precisely what worried him. Back at Isabela's, the atmosphere was tense but calm. The kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, and a neat pile of old documents sat on the dining table. These are all I could find, she said. Letters from my first school, my husband's citizenship documents, even my marriage certificate. Harold carefully picked up each one, inspecting the faded ink and brittle paper. These help. They establish a continuous presence. Community ties. Moral character. He paused, pulling out a yellowed envelope from the bottom of the pile. What's this? Isabela leaned forward, frowning. Oh, that was from someone I used to know, back home. He opened it gently. The letter was written in Spanish, the script urgent and elegant. A few lines in, Harold's brow furrowed. This talks about the 1957 protest in Cordova. The one where the cathedral was raided. I was there, she said quietly. I helped shelter students in the sacristy. One of them was only 14. That event made it into the intelligence reports, Harold muttered. They claimed it was a terrorist operation. She met his eyes. It was a prayer vigil. Harold exhaled slowly, folding the letter. They got it wrong. We got it wrong. Later that evening, the story broke online. Sophie's article was brief but powerful. Former federal judge defends elderly immigrant targeted for deportation. It included a photo of Isabela in her garden, the flag of her neighborhood school fluttering behind her. The comments flooded in within hours. This is who we're deporting now? Where's the compassion? She's been here longer than most of us. The coverage rippled outward. Local news picked it up. Then a national outlet reposted it. Suddenly, Isabela wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, Harold received a call from an unfamiliar number. Judge Whitmore. Yes. This is Warren Lieber at the Office of Legal Counsel. We've received your petition. I'd like to discuss the optics. Harold's tone cooled. I'm not concerned with optics. I'm concerned with justice. Lieber sighed. You're asking us to revisit a Cold War-era classification. That sets a precedent. I've spent a lifetime defending the law, Harold said, but sometimes the law needs to defend people. Then let me be blunt. If we let this through, others may come forward. They should. A pause. Then, we'll respond within 72 hours. That night, Harold sat with Isabela in her backyard. The garden lights cast a soft glow over the lavender and sage. She poured them each a glass of lemonade and passed over a folded photograph. That's me, she said. The girl in the middle. He studied it. A grainy black and white image of 6 teenagers, standing in a sunlit square, hands raised in a salute he didn't recognize. That was taken the day before I fled. Harold looked up. You never showed this to anyone? No one asked. He nodded slowly. It's powerful. May I include it in the supplemental packet? She hesitated. Won't they twist it? They might. But silence won't protect you anymore. She looked at him for a long time, then gave a single nod. The next morning, Harold submitted the photo and the translated letter from Cordova as supplemental exhibits. He included a personal affidavit, one he never imagined writing, acknowledging the possible flaw in his original 1985 ruling and requesting leniency on humanitarian grounds. He stared at the final line before hitting submit. I respectfully request that the court weigh not only the history on paper, but the human life that endures beyond it. 3 days passed. Then 5. Harold busied himself with paperwork, meetings, interviews, anything to keep from staring at the phone. Isabela, for her part, seemed strangely at peace. I've lived a full life, she said one evening. But if this is how it ends, at least someone saw me. Really saw me. It's not over, Harold insisted. Then promise me something. Anything. If I'm sent away, don't stop. There are others like me. Quiet ones. Forgotten ones. He nodded slowly. I promise. On the 6th day, just after noon, Harold's phone rang. He answered before the second ring. This is Judge Howard Ferris, said the voice on the line. I've reviewed your petition. Harold stood without realizing it. Yes, Your Honor. There is sufficient cause to grant a temporary stay. Harold felt the air rush from his chest. We're scheduling a formal review for 30 days from now, Ferris continued. Prepare your evidence. You've bought her time. Thank you, Harold whispered. You did good work, Judge. For what it's worth. The line clicked dead. Harold arrived at Isabela's moments later, waving the printed decision like a banner. You're not going anywhere, he said, breathless. She took the paper in trembling hands. Read it once. Twice. Then pressed it to her heart. I knew you would find a way. I didn't do this alone. No, she said softly. But only someone like you could make them listen. They sat in the sun-dappled silence. The weight of relief mingled with what was still to come. The fight was far from over. But for the first time in weeks, they both believed they could win it. The temporary stay changed everything, at least on paper. Isabela could remain in the country for 30 more days. But 30 days wasn't long, and Harold knew the hardest work was just beginning. He needed new evidence. Not just personal history or faded letters, but legal ammunition, something strong enough to compel the court to reopen the case permanently. That meant confronting the past head-on. Harold returned to his office and opened a file he hadn't touched in decades. The 1985 ruling that haunted him. He flipped through the brittle pages, his own words staring back in neat, precise font. Association with anti-government organizations known to engage in acts of resistance. Grounds for denial. He winced. The ruling had been praised then, lauded for its clarity, its firmness in national security. But it was clear now how much had been left unchallenged. The nuance. The truth. Harold made a decision. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in over 15 years. Harold Whitmore, said a voice on the other end. Didn't expect to hear from you. Hello, Alex. I need to speak with you. About Cordova. About what we got wrong. There was a pause. That's ancient history. Not for her. Another pause, longer this time. You want to reopen it? I want to correct it. A sigh. I still have the briefings. Some of the old intel was questionable. But if you want access, you'll need clearance. I can get it. Then meet me at the archives. Tomorrow. The next morning, Harold took the train into the city. He hadn't walked the marble halls of the Federal Records Building in years. Everything smelled the same: leather, paper, time. Alex Novak was waiting, older, grayer, but still sharp-eyed. He led Harold to a secured room where yellowed folders sat under plastic covers. Here's what you need, Alex said, laying out one of the folders. This is the report that lumped Isabela's group with a militant faction operating in the same region. No clear evidence. Just proximity. Harold scanned the document. Misinterpretations, blurred photos, third-hand sources. So much of it based on fear, not fact. This was the foundation for the ruling, Harold said grimly. Alex nodded. We were told to connect dots. Whether or not the lines made sense. Do you mind if I photograph a few of these? They're declassified now. Just don't lose them. Back home, Harold added the files to Isabela's case packet. The difference was night and day. Now, he wasn't just appealing for compassion. He was proving that the system had erred, and he had been part of it. Later that afternoon, Isabela stopped by with a basket of cookies and a stack of community letters. Her neighbors had started writing to the court, testifying to her decades of service and kindness. I didn't know people felt this way, she said, eyes wide with emotion. You've been holding up this block longer than I have, Harold said. They know. She smiled. Still, it's something to see it in ink. They worked together through the evening, organizing the letters, updating exhibits, building a timeline that wove her life into the fabric of the neighborhood. Not as a refugee, not even as a citizen, but as a cornerstone. The next day, a letter arrived. Thick envelope. Official seal. Harold opened it slowly. It was a request for him to appear at the preliminary hearing in person and to testify about his 1985 ruling. They want you on record, Sophie said, when Harold called her with the news. I expected this, Harold said. You know what that means, don't you? They'll question your judgment. Your legacy. I'm ready, he said quietly. Maybe I should have been ready years ago. The hearing was set for 10 days later. In that time, Harold polished every detail of the case. The affidavit. The exhibits. His own statement. He wrote and rewrote it a dozen times. In the final version, he wrote, if the law loses its humanity, it becomes a tool of fear. I once let that fear guide my decision. Today, I ask this court to do better. The morning of the hearing, he dressed in a suit he hadn't worn since his retirement. It still fit, barely. As he stood in the mirror, adjusting his tie, he didn't see a judge. He saw a man choosing to own his mistakes. Isabela waited for him outside the courthouse. She wore a deep blue shawl and held his arm as they climbed the steps together. Whatever happens, she said softly. Thank you. We're not done yet, he replied. They entered the building side by side, two lives that had once intersected by accident, now bound by a shared purpose neither of them had seen coming. The courtroom hadn't changed much in the 10 years since Harold had last sat on the bench. Polished oak. Stained glass. That same solemn hush that settled over everything like dust. Only this time, he was seated at the witness table. Across the aisle, Isabela sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, but Harold could see the tension in her shoulders. She gave him a small nod. He returned it, then faced forward. The judge entered. Young, sharp, and precise Judge Kara Mitchell. Harold remembered her from a clerkship early in her career. Now, she wore the robe. The weight of the law had shifted to her. Call to order, she announced. This hearing is to determine the validity of the petitioner's request for permanent stay of removal on the basis of incorrect original classification and new humanitarian grounds. She turned to Harold. Mr. Whitmore, please proceed. He stood, cleared his throat, and began. I served as a federal judge for over 3 decades. In 1985, I presided over a series of immigration cases related to Cold War asylum requests. In one such case, I ruled against an individual associated with the Court of a Movement in South America. He paused, letting the silence settle. At the time, I based that decision on intelligence reports provided by federal agencies. Those reports suggested links to violent factions. But recently, I obtained declassified documents that contradict those assessments. The group in question was, in fact, engaged in peaceful protest, not terrorism. He looked toward Isabela. One of the individuals involved in that protest, whose plea for asylum was denied as a result of my ruling, was this woman, Isabela Reyes. The courtroom was still. Your Honor, I am not here to defend my past. I am here to correct it. The government attorney rose. Young, confident, and clearly prepared. Judge Whitmore, isn't it true that you were hailed for your national security decisions during the 1980s? Yes, Harold replied. And that you were considered a legal authority on political asylum? I was. So why are you questioning your own judgment now? Because time has revealed truths I didn't see then, Harold said firmly. And because a good judge serves the law, but a great one seeks justice. The attorney narrowed her eyes. Aren't you concerned that reopening this case could lead to challenges of dozens of rulings? Yours and others. I'm more concerned with allowing a miscarriage of justice to stand for the sake of convenience. Judge Mitchell asked the next question. If Ms. Reyes had been deported back then, what would have happened? Harold hesitated. She may not have survived. Several activists from that region disappeared after forced return. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. Thank you. That's all for now. The hearing continued with brief testimony from Sophie, who spoke about the recent attention the case had drawn and how the neighborhood rallied in support. Community letters were submitted, along with photos, news clippings, and the declassified documents. Finally, Judge Mitchell adjourned the hearing with a final statement. I will issue a ruling in the next 7 days. This court thanks you for your testimony. Harold and Isabela stepped outside together into the afternoon sun. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Isabela said, I never thought I'd see someone stand up for me like that. He looked at her. You've stood for others your whole life. I'm just catching up. That night, Harold sat alone in his study, rereading the documents one last time. Not to edit them, but to accept them. He thought of the courtroom, the judge's measured voice, the rows of pews, the weight of truth finally being spoken aloud. He didn't know what Mitchell would decide, but he knew he had done what he could. At his age, regrets weighed heavy, but redemption, he realized, was light, a kind of grace. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Isabela's home. She opened it slowly, with Harold by her side. Her hands trembled. The letter read, "In light of new evidence and in acknowledgement of an erroneous classification that led to undue denial of asylum, the court hereby grants a permanent stay of removal. Ms. Isabela Reyes is authorized to remain in the United States as a legal resident." She covered her mouth, eyes wet with disbelief. "I can stay," she whispered. "This is real." Harold smiled gently. "It's real." She turned to him, grasping his hands. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, the emotion catching in his throat. "I didn't save you," he said. "I just helped the world finally see who you've been all along." Isabela's victory was a quiet one, but its resonance echoed through the years. Her case had set a precedent, not just legally, but morally. The ruling had rippled outward, sparking conversations in law schools, among legal professionals, and on the streets where neighbors had rallied for her. But for Harold, the battle was not yet over. He sat alone in his study, surrounded by stacks of papers, case files, and old books. The soft hum of the house was the only sound, and for a moment, Harold let the weight of it all settle around him. He hadn't expected this. This last chapter in his life was nothing like the one he had envisioned when he retired. He had assumed that peace would come in the form of quiet reflection, that his legacy would be one of measured decisions and the satisfaction of a job well done. But instead, it had come through redemption, through action, a choice to stand for what was right, no matter the personal cost. His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a text from Sophie. "Did you see the news? Isabela's case is in the papers again. They're calling it a landmark victory for human rights." Harold smiled, a bittersweet feeling rising in his chest. The victory was hers. The fight was over. Or was it? He had already begun thinking about the ripple effect of his actions. How many others like Isabela were still living quietly in the shadows, their stories buried under the weight of bureaucracy and fear? How many others had been wrongly condemned, their voices lost in the rush of historical judgment? 2 days later, Harold received a call from Judge Mitchell, the same one who had overseen the hearing. "Judge Whitmore, I wanted to personally thank you," she said, her voice warm but professional. "Your testimony and the evidence you presented, it made a difference. We're seeing a shift in how these cases are approached." Harold felt a pang of pride, but it was tempered by something else, something deeper. "Thank you, Judge Mitchell. I'm just glad the truth came out. You gave a voice to someone who had none," she continued. "And that matters more than you know." As the weeks passed, Harold's reputation shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. His former colleagues, the ones who had once praised his firmness, now saw him through a new lens. His decision to stand up for Isabela had become a topic of conversation in the legal community, one that left many questioning their own roles in upholding the law. In a few quiet exchanges, Harold was asked about his decision. Did he feel conflicted? Regretful? Did he think he had compromised his legacy? He always responded the same way. "I didn't compromise anything. I reclaimed it." One evening, as Harold walked back from the mailbox, he saw Isabela tending to her garden. It was a quiet scene, but there was something profound in the sight. The flowers were in bloom. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting a golden light over the peaceful backyard. Harold leaned on the fence, watching her work. "You've turned this place into something beautiful," he said. She smiled, wiping her brow. "It wasn't just me. The people here helped." "You helped?" He shook his head. "No. You helped yourself. I only opened a door." She paused and turned toward him. "You gave me the courage to walk through it. You reminded me that I had a right to be heard. So, thank you." He nodded, the weight of her gratitude filling him with a warmth he hadn't expected. The months that followed were peaceful. Isabela, now officially a legal resident, continued to live in the house she had called home for over 60 years. She hosted neighborhood meetings, shared her story with anyone willing to listen, and continued to live her life with a quiet dignity that left an impression on everyone around her. Harold, meanwhile, found himself at a crossroads. He could retire again, this time, for good, or he could stay involved in the work that had, unexpectedly, become his second chance. There were still cases like Isabela's. He knew that now. One evening, As he sat with Sophie at his favorite cafe, he asked the question aloud. Do you think I've done enough? Sophie looked thoughtful before answering. It's never enough, Harold. There are always more stories. More people who need someone to speak for them. But I think you've done something rare, something few people ever get the chance to do. He looked at her, unsure of how to respond. People spend their lives trying to leave a legacy, she continued. But sometimes, it's the quiet ones who change the world. As the sun set that evening, Harold stood on the porch of his home, looking out over the neighborhood. He thought of Isabela, of her courage, her strength, and her unyielding belief in her right to belong. Maybe that was his true legacy. Not the judgments he had written, but the lives he had touched by admitting when he was wrong. The humanity he had rediscovered in a world that too often valued the law over the people it was meant to protect. In the distance, the sound of children laughing echoed from the park. It was a sound Harold hadn't noticed before, but now, it seemed to fill him with a quiet sense of peace. He had done what he could. And for the first time in years, he felt certain that his actions had mattered. The fight had been long, but it had been worth it. And in the end, Harold knew that the quiet revolution, small, simple, and full of humanity, was what had saved him, too.